Ronnie Hickman did a lot last year to impress Buckeye fans as he led the team in tackles. But what do NFL scouts think about his performance and where he might fall in next year's NFL draft? We'll discuss that and a whole lot more right here on Locked On Buckeyes.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Tuesday, August 9th in the year 2022, and here with us once again as we have gone, I think, almost every position getting a preseason draft grade on different Buckeye positions and players. It's Ryan Roberts back with us from Rise and Draft Scouting. Ryan's also the recruiting guy for Irish Breakdown. I told myself I wasn't going to make any Notre Dame comments or things about the team right now, but football's almost here. And Ryan, I hope you're ready, not just to talk about guys like Ronnie Hickman and Josh Proctor during today's show about their prospects of playing in the NFL, but I also hope you're ready to cry at the end of that game, week one, as the Buckeyes beat the Irish. Ryan, it's the only way I can welcome you right now to the show. Welcome back.
I appreciate it, Jay. I appreciate it. I hope I'm not crying too much, man. I hope it's I'm hoping for a very competitive football game. It's funny, I'm actually going over friends or mutual friends' house that are actually Ohio State fans. So it's going to be an interesting environment, man. The wife is like going to be 5 months pregnant at that point, so I can't be too obnoxious. So I need to hold myself back a little bit, but I think it's going to be a good football game. Smash Notre Dame on that money line, man. 15.5. It's crazy.
15.5.
It's crazy.
Oh, my goodness. What's also crazy is not only that Ryan is back with us again. I love having Ryan on the show, but the defensive back position. You're going to have 4 of these 5 positions, as Ohio State is going to have 5 DBs. 4 of these guys could literally be drafted in next year's draft. And Denzel Burke be the one that's not in that unit because he's a sophomore right now, literally a true sophomore. But you have 4 guys that can be drafted that have a lot of experience. One's coming off of an injury, one's a transfer. But all these guys have shown that there is a possibility of them playing in the National Football League. Ryan, I don't know how rare it is, but to me, I venture it's pretty rare that over half of your unit, 80% of your unit that's playing at this position in this group can be gone at the end of the season and get drafted. I love the prospect. I think it's great for recruiting, but it's also kind of exciting to see what they'll do this year during the football season.
Well, I mean, traditionally, Ohio State shouldn't be that foreign to it, right? I mean, you had great stretches of the Marshawn Lattimores of the world and the Garyon Conleys and the Denzel Wards. And I mean, it's been a embarrassment of riches at points. I mean, that's why Ohio State has kind of gone back and forth with like LSU and Florida about being DBU for a while there, right? So historically, Ohio State has done a really good job producing defensive backs. It's been a very different kind of trend over the last couple of years. I mean, I think it started with Sean Wade kind of having the fall that he did, and you're just trying to get back to that defensive back you type of situation. But it is a very talented group, Jay. I am looking forward to seeing Jim Knowles' inflection on the defense, not only just because the defense wasn't good enough last year for Ohio State, but there is talent. I think that when you're looking about guys, and I know we're talking about the draft eligible guys today, but even a Denzel Burke, who, like you said, is going to be a sophomore this year, he might be the best player in that secondary, but it's going to be interesting to see how good they can be, because I thought Jim Knowles got a lot out of the players that he had last year for Oklahoma State in the secondary. And I mean, I would argue that Ohio State has much more talented players in their secondary. So I'm interested to see how they develop, because they haven't quite been developed to as good a college football players as they probably should be based upon their talent. But the key is that they have great talent and they have a really good guy now calling their defense. So I'm very interested to see how that defense plays in a whole. But I think the secondary is going to take a big step forward in 2022.
Ryan,
just not in week one. Just not in week one. Sorry.
Ryan, sometimes I do get caught in recency bias and kind of get sucked into what has happened literally in Ryan Day's tenure over the past few years. But you said it so well. As I am thinking about the last year, maybe the year before, is about the DBs that have been producing. Does Ohio State lose half of their unit 1 year or not, or over half of it? Well, honestly, if you think about it, as Ryan said it so well, the DBs at Ohio State historically and lately have been phenomenal. And they've been guys that have gone to the NFL that have not just recently. I mean, you think about Malcolm Jenkins 10 plus years ago, just retired from the Saints. He was a guy that was a staple on the defense as well. You think about the national championship team in 2002 with Mike Doss and Dustin Fox. And so they have had a long string, and even you can go Antoine Winfield to go way back to talk about older guys. They've had a great, really history of great defensive back play. And I think we're going to get back to that this year. And I think it's all going to be partly behind a guy that's going to be leading this unit. He was actually at Big Ten Media Days, and Ronnie Hickman led the team in tackles last year with 99 tackles last year on the season. I think that he's going to be a pivotal part. Everyone's talking about Josh Proctor and coming back and Tanner McCallister, him being a coach on the field. I think Ronnie Hickman, Ryan, might be a guy that is going to need to be a leader for the Buckeyes. And I think NFL scouts love what they saw from him last year at Ohio State.
Yeah, he's a really interesting player, Jay. I mean, obviously he's a New Jersey kid, so they build him great in New Jersey to start with, right? So he's a kid that I've been very well aware of since he was coming out of high school, because he was a high recruited kid. And I mean, he was a top 100 caliber type of recruit, 6'1", 205. He's got kind of that strong safety feel to his game, right? And you mentioned the 99 tackles. That's because he is a very ferocious player in run support. Like, he'll come up and he'll stick you. I'm interested to see how Jim Knowles implements him, because I know that from my just rumors that I've heard, I think that he's going to play kind of a strong safety role and maybe even be like a little bit of a hybrid type of defender, which I'm interested to see, because he has all the athletic traits to be that type of dude near the line of scrimmage. I mean, again, he comes to balance well as a tackler. He's got physicality to him. I think he might have the best range of their safeties on the back end too, because I mean, like, Proctor and him are, I think, both ideally strong safety types, but I think that you're going to play Hickman in that role because he was just so good at it last year when Proctor went down with the injury, right? So he's a really interesting player, because I think in today's league where hybrid defenders have even more taken a step forward in the game, you think of like the positionless football type of thing, right? Ronnie Hickman's going to be a strong safety by the classification on a roster, but I think there's going to be some reps where you see him in the box, on the second level, almost playing like a de facto, dime backer type of thing. I think there's going to be some spots where he's going to be in the slot, playing some man-to-man coverage. So I think the versatility really screams to me when I think of a Ronnie Hickman. He has a lot of just overall solid traits across the board. I wouldn't say that he has any one trait in his game that is like elite in any capacity, but I think he just does everything well, which is why you want to kind of implement him in different roles, because he can be a versatile, almost chess piece on the back end. So he's a really interesting player. I think he's going to be a tone setter for this team. And I think that I think of how Jim Knowles used like a Colby Harvell Peel when he was at Oklahoma State, who was just a solid to good football player, but a tough football player. I think Ronnie Hickman could be a much more athletic version of that type of player. So I'm excited to see how they just implement him this year. And he definitely has traits that you'll look forward to seeing, because I think that he can fulfill a couple different roles in the back end for Ohio State.
We're here with Ryan Roberts from Ryzen Draft Scouting. This is Locked on Buckeyes. Ryan and I are going through the draft eligible defensive backs for the Buckeyes in 2022 and kind of getting an early NFL draft look at them. Ryan, could you please discuss and highlight what makes him more of a strong safety versus a free safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the usage mostly. Like, I think there is something where I think there is some range on the back end where I think he can play from like a too high alignment and work, middle of the field to the sideline. But what we've seen from him is the fact that he is a very willing run defender. He can come up, he can work the alley. He runs the alley like a bat out of hell. He's got a lot of physicality to him. And I think he is a little better, though, Jay, in my opinion, playing in short spaces comparative to playing like full field type of stuff, right? So he's more of a player that I want coming forward than working backward and working laterally personally. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, you just mentioned Malcolm Jenkins, right? Like, Malcolm Jenkins was a cornerback for Ohio State, transitioned to that strong safety role in the NFL after starting a cornerback early on for the Saints. He's another guy that you want kind of coming forward. So I don't think it's a negative at all. I just think that's kind of just where his game parlays the best. And I also do think that the reason I like him coming forward a little bit back is he is a little bit of a gambler, right?
Yeah,
Like he does kind of see red a little bit, right? And sometimes when you see red, you're going to get yourself out of position at times. So I'm not sure I want him working from depth a ton because that's going to work with a little more discipline and kind of playing with patience and doing that type of stuff. I want him seeing red and I want him playing with his hair on fire. So that's why I just like him kind of coming forward more than going backward.
Ryan, where do you sit with him right now as far as where he might fall in next year's draft?
I think for me right now, Jay, he is a tough person to kind of peg because I think that this safety group has a lot of uncertainty this year. I mean, you have a guy like, for instance, like an Antonio Johnson that I like at Texas A&M. Jordan Battle's a good solid football player out of Alabama. But it's like Brandon Joseph transferred from Northwestern to Notre Dame. What's he going to look like in the new scenery? J.L. Skinner's kind of a bigger body type guy out of Boise State. And then after that, there's just a lot of uncertainty in the safety position. So you could honestly, and again, I think we should also remember Ronnie Hickman is only going to be a junior this year, technically from that side. So he is draft eligible, which is why we're talking about him. I think that there is a reality where he takes a step forward. He's a day 2 player and he's able to come out early, or he's a guy that might stick around for the 2024 NFL draft, right? So I just think there's a little bit of uncertainty with when we'll see a Ronnie Hickman. But if you're asking me who is potentially the big riser in the group this year as far as the safeties go, Ronnie would be my first choice. And that's not just saying it because I'm on this podcast, right? Like, I think that he legitimately has substantial upside in this class. And he's one of those guys where you saw a lot of great stuff from him last year. If he's able to take the step forward, he could eventually rise into a top 5 safety in this class. So I'm going to say the upside is a day 2 type of player. It's just we have to take that step forward and has to show that the flashes we saw last year are more of a regular thing this year.
What would you recommend? Stay in school for another year, go into 2024 draft, or come out after this year and enter in 2023?
It really depends on everything shakes out from the safety position. And obviously the development for him. But I do think the safety class is going to be a little bit wide open. So if he has a nice year, I think he has the opportunity to go pretty high. Like I think that is in the cards for him. So I think there's always a couple different sides to it, right? Like, I mean, in theory, with how the class looks like, he might be able to take advantage of some opportunity. But then on the other side, Jay, I mean, Jim Knowles historically as a defensive coordinator, the first year that he takes over a program, and again, it's different than Ohio State versus taking over an Oklahoma State, and there's going to be different situations there. The first year, though, usually isn't great under Jim Knowles. Usually it's year 2 where teams really take that big jump, right? So I think for a long term, staying another year might be great because I want to see him in Jim Knowles' system for a couple of years. But I think that the demand for this class at safety to have some kind of appealing risers could force him into the class. So it's a little bit of a cop-out saying I'm not 100% sure. But I think the bottom baseline and the bottom line for this is that there are options for Ronnie Hickman, I think.
Ryan, there's also another guy here who is a fan favorite who unfortunately had an injury last year. And Buckeye fans are really upset with his replacement, who is now at USC. But Josh Proctor is a guy that I have loved watching play. I think he's a hard-hitting safety. I know some people on the team say he's the hardest-hitting player on the football team as far as defensive-wise DBs goes. And some say he's the hardest-hitting DB they've ever seen. These are his teammates saying this. So that is one thing for him that's huge. But he is coming off of an injury and a new coach, a new system, and also you're getting your feet back under you playing the football. I don't know how the NFL scouts view him going into this year because I know they want to see some big plays, but the injury might be something that might not allow them to go higher on him because they're skeptical about another injury once he gets to the National Football League. What do you see first from the film with Josh Proctor?
Yeah, I mean, so for NFL scouts, they really did like him going into the year last year. Then, unfortunately, the injury happens. And I think it's just kind of a wait and see a little bit of a thing for Josh Proctor right now. But, I mean, what I see on film is he's got pretty good size to him, right around 6'2", 194 pounds. We had over 32-inch arms verified. And so, I mean, he has a good size profile to him. And I think that there's a lot of appealing traits just from a body type perspective. And the things I love about him, Jay, honestly, is I don't think he's a great athlete. I think he's a solid overall athlete, but man, he plays hard. Like he really does, man. He gets downhill, he runs the alley. I think he's going to be a premier special teamer on the next level, too. So I don't think that he has as much upside as a Ronnie Hickman, because I just think Ronnie's I think he's a caliber up of an athlete comparative to a Josh Proctor. But Proctor to me just reminds me of a guy where it's just like you're going to undervalue that guy because he's not the flashiest athlete of all time, but the physicality, the eye discipline, and the ability to play special teams, I think that's the stay power on the next level. And honestly, we learned from our mistakes in the scouting world. I was much too low on Jordan Fuller. Much too low. And I think that Jordan's a little better of an athlete than a Josh Proctor is, but I think Josh Proctor just has that baseline where you're just like, the floor is so high. Like, I would just be surprised if Josh Proctor wasn't just a solid contributor, maybe never a full-time starter, but just like playing special teams and making a roster and doing all those types of things. Like the physicality, the tenacity, those things immediately pop off the film, man. The kid plays extremely hard. He's honestly a joy to watch play football because he has little, and this could be about the injury a little bit, right? He doesn't really care about throwing his body on the line, right? Like
not
he
at
has
all.
kind of that. He is a guy that is going to play hard to every whistle, throw his body around. He doesn't really care about, kind of preserving his body in any way, right? So I really do enjoy the film because he has a lot of the tenacity. I personally, though, do just question. I don't know what the upside is with him because I just don't see great athlete on film. I see a solid athlete.
We're here with Ryan Roberts from Rise and Draft Scouting. This is Locked on Buckeyes. Ryan and I are going through the draft-eligible defensive backs for the Ohio State Buckeyes. 4 of the 5 starters are draft-eligible. We have already hit on Ronnie Hickman. We're in the middle of Josh Proctor. And Ryan, you mentioned something about how he just likes to throw his body into people. That might actually play to his favor, as Jim Knowles wants his defense to be aggressive. That type of mentality, yes, it could lead to injury, but it could lead to you making some plays that your coach will love on the field. I don't like the injury part of this conversation. I love the aggressiveness, the physicality that Proctor brings, and how he could literally be a guy that could move up draft boards because of his aggressive nature during this upcoming season.
He's like a coach's dream, honestly, as a player, from a physical perspective, right? Like he's a guy that is usually in the right spot, and he'll throw his body around. And honestly, Jay, like I already mentioned, Kobe Harvell-Peel that was at Oklahoma State. They had a couple of those guys, man. Like they had him, they had Trey Sterling. Tanner McAllister is kind of the same guy. Like he's going to throw his body around too, playing in the nickel. So I think that when we're looking at a guy like a Josh Proctor, again, the numbers, I don't think that he's going to test great. I don't think everything's going to pop off the screen, but coaches are going to be the ones that are go to kind of knock on the table and stand on the table for this type of guy when draft day comes around. They're going to be like, we have to spend a day 3 pick on this guy because he's going to be a special teamer for me. He's going to be in the right spot. He's going to be able to do multiple things on the back end for me from a physical perspective. So I think this is going to be one of those guys where the coaches may like him more than the scouts, if I'm being honest. But at the end of the day, the scouts do have a say in who they're drafting, and I think that they're going to kind of stand on the table for a guy like Proctor.
Where do you think he goes in the draft next year?
I think he's a day 3 player. I think he's probably a mid-day 3 type of dude, 5th, 6th round, somewhere in that ballpark, because I do think that there is a little bit of a cap on his ceiling. Like I don't see him being a high ceiling type of player at the next level. But I think on day 3, you're looking at guys where you give me a solid floor to, just kind of be in the right spot, and you're going to be a really good special teamer for me. So at worst case scenario, Josh Proctor is a good special teamer, backup safety type. I think that's ultimately what he is, and no fault of his own. I just think there's some athletic limitations to him. So that leads me to believe, I think, day 3 type of player right now, because I don't think that he has, starter upside or star upside.
Next up is a guy who Ryan has been talking about literally, I think almost every time or every other time Ryan and I get together to record a show. Cam Brown comes up in our pre-draft conversations, and it's not just something where I'm bringing him up or Ryan is like, hey, one time Ryan was like, hey, I heard this about so-and-so, but it's just been someone that Ryan heard something, Ryan watched some film, and the film kind of gave Ryan a certain insight to how Cam Brown is as a player. We all saw him last year get a lot more attention last year because of how well Denzel Burke played on the opposite side of Brown. But I do think, though, there are going to be teams that are going to be kind of nervous to throw to Burke's side or Brown's side because both these guys are really good at what they do. When you see Cam Brown, what do you see, Ryan?
I liked Cam Brown a lot. He was one of my more pleasant surprises at the cornerback spot in the 2023 cycle so far because I'll be honest, Jay, like I knew Denzel Burke, who's only going to be a sophomore this year. Sevyn Banks was the guy that everyone was talking about going into last season. I didn't really know who Cameron Brown was, to be very honest. And I watched him about 2 to 3 weeks ago, and he's a good player, man. He's a really good player. I mean, number 26, if you haven't seen him, Ohio State podcast, so I'm sure most guys have seen him at this point. But he just kind of hits a bunch of pretty solid size thresholds, right? Like he's 6 foot, 31-inch arms, 4.45. We have him on the estimated as far as his 40-yard dash time. I think that he's going to be
impressive.
Yeah, it is. And he doesn't play to that speed though on film, to be honest. Like I think that there are some moments where I'm like, okay, he's a better athlete than he plays. But the thing I really like about him is he's physical, man. I watched him against Penn State where he took, and again, Jahan Dotson should not be playing outside on the line of scrimmage a ton, like in the boundary. But there were a couple of plays where he's in press against Jahan Dotson, and he took him to the sideline, man, and almost took him to the fences, you know? Like, I was like, oh, okay. There's some really nice physicality. There's a really nice spatial awareness here. I think that he's a good all-around athlete. I liked Cam Brown a ton. I really did. Again, he was a pleasant surprise. Didn't know much about him. The biggest question marks with him are going to be consistency, one, like from a game-to-game perspective, because I think he's a really good press man corner, but I do think there's some times where he gets a little lazy in his technique at the line of scrimmage, but when it's on, it's really good press man technique. And the other thing, Jay, is that he has dealt with some injuries in the past, right?
Yes.
So he's been a guy where, you know, you're getting into your groove a little bit, and then some, you know, minor injury kind of hits a little bit of a setback. And a cornerback position could be one of those where you need a rhythm, right? Like you need to have those reps and to have that consistency. So I think if Cam Brown puts together a full season, I think he's going to be one of the better cornerbacks in this class. I don't think he's got first to second round potential, but I see a press man corner who's extremely physical, has a good all-around athletic profile. I think he's a good player, man. He was one of the bigger surprises I've had over the recent weeks.
Do you see him as a player that could be interchangeable via outside corner and also nickel corner at the next level?
Oh, 100%, 100%. He is that press man technique that I talked about, that physicality, also parlays to the run game. He is a physical defender. He will come up and hit you. So I think that his ability to mirror a match inside will be good enough. And the big thing is that as a alley player, as a force player, I think that he can come up and he can stick you in the run game, because a lot of people kind of lose sight of the fact that like nickels need to tackle really well, right? Like just because they're smaller guys traditionally, they need to stick their nose in there and be a player in the run game. So I think he's got some inside-outside ability, press man outside, and I think he's got the physicality to play nickel, and I think he's a good enough athlete to kind of mirror a match inside. So yeah, I think that he can definitely serve a couple different roles on the defense.
Last but not least, there is a young man who has not played a game as a Buckeye just yet. Got a few more minutes on Tanner McAllister, someone that all I've heard all offseason is he's helping the DBs and the other defenders learn Jim Knowles' defense and really understand not just the defense, but how Jim Knowles operates, the kind of mannerisms you're going to see from Knowles, the type of terminology you're going to get from the new coach, the way that Jim Knowles will react to different situations during a game or in practice. So he's really been that coach. I do think we've seen some good plays from him at Oklahoma State. But, of course, you're in Columbus, different than Stillwater. You're in the Big Ten with Ohio State, not the Big 12, with different brands of football, a different stage. I mean, you're going to be on Big Noon Kickoff at 12 noon on Fox all the time. So you're going to get a lot of different attention now than you did back then. I do think Tanner McAllister is a guy that is going to be someone that's going to be a staple. And honestly, he could be someone that Jim Knowles can say, you see how McCallister played in 2022 at that nickel corner spot. Some say third safety. That's what I want from that guy on the field from now on, whoever plays that spot. So McAllister, I got to get out of here. You got to talk, Ryan. What do you see from this guy when you watch the film?
Yeah, now, Jay, he's a really physical football player. Like I kind of said, that's why he has played that nickel position, and he did a good job at Oklahoma State, in my opinion. And there's a reason that Ohio State wanting to come there. I think the biggest thing that he's going to give to this team, like you said, is the adaptation and then transition to the Jim Knowles defense. He'll be able to help with that pretty quick. Like, that's a nice thing. I didn't love his film, if I'm being completely honest. He's 5'10 and a half, 193 pounds, sub 31-inch arms. Not as big a deal as a guy that's projecting to a pure nickel at the next level. Like, he's going to be a guy that's going to be an inside player solely at the next level, obviously. I just didn't see great traits, honestly. Like, he's a pesky dude. Like, he's going to get in your face a little bit. He's going to be able to mirror to a degree, but I just doesn't have great length, athleticism overall, just everything kind of mixed together. I am struggling with him a little bit. I don't think that he's a great football player. I think he's a heady football player or a tough football player, but I'm not sure this is a draftable football player that we're looking at, unfortunately. He's a good college player, though. Good college football player.
You need those guys. Like, you need
100%.
good college football players. You need those guys on your roster because not everybody's going to go to the NFL. It's unfortunate you say, well, there's 22 guys that started at Ohio State. They're all pros. No, that's not the case. But you need these solid players and solid pieces to be able to win games, possibly go undefeated, possibly win championships in the conference and in the nation. You need these guys on your roster. And so, Ryan, as you're saying all those things, I didn't sound like you're going to say he's going to be a draftable guy. Right. I don't see that as a problem when you're currently good at your current level. It's not a problem if you don't go to the next level and do great things. It'd be nice, but let's do one step at a time. And if you don't flourish now to be a draftable guy, you can still have a phenomenal career at college football, which is not a bad thing.
No, it's not. And every year there is going to be players on your team, if you're a fan of a successful team, that are exactly that. There's nothing wrong with being a really good college player, but you don't necessarily have the traits to excel on the next level. I mean, Notre Dame's had those kind of guys, right? Like Chris Fink a few years ago, wide receiver, like wasn't an NFL guy, good college football player though. I mean, Tom Zibikowski back in the day played a couple years in the NFL, but like he wasn't what he was at Notre Dame. Like he was a stud at Notre Dame.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah. He was a stud at Notre Dame. He wasn't a great player on the NFL level. Like there's just some guys that just do not have traits. Ohio State has had guys where it's like really good college player. Did they end up being great NFL players? Absolutely not. I mean, it's the world. I mean, even think of a Tough Borland. So I know it's kind of a mixed review from a Ohio State perspective, but I'm gonna say Chris Borland, who's a much different player. But Tough Borland was a player that got everything he could have out of his athletic ability. And he was a multi-year starter at Ohio State and did a solid job there, right? Was he going to be an NFL player? Absolutely not, but who cares? It's fine. You need those guys. You need those glue guys. You need guys that have the depth piece. And I think, again, Tanner McAllister is going to be so valuable this year to getting everybody on the right page. There was a reason that Jim Knowles wanted him to come from Oklahoma State. So you're right. There's nothing wrong with just being a really good college player, because I do think that Tanner McAllister is going to be a valuable college football player for Oklahoma State. I mean, Ohio State. I just do not see him being a guy that the NFL is going to value tremendously.
Ryan, it's unfortunate that our time this offseason is over. I would love to pick up and try. I could find different things to talk about, but fall camp is in full swing, and there's a lot coming out of Ohio State and their practices right now. Can't wait till we can have Ryan on the show again in the offseason at the end of the year to do the same thing. Literally, Ryan and I have done this position by position, draft eligible guys. What are their prospects and what are scouts saying about them at the next level going into next year's draft? Ryan, if you could, let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter. Some things going on at Rise and Draft Scouting. And also, if they want to check out Irish Breakdown to get an early look at the Irish going into the Week 1 matchup that the Buckeyes and Notre Dame have, feel free to check out that website. They have great stuff for you over there as well.
Yeah, man. Now, Jay, I really appreciate you as always having me. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the @ that's right underneath you, the handle @ Rise and Draft. You can follow me there, as well as go to riseanddraft.com. Try to keep everything as simple as possible for the NFL draft work. You know, there's scouting reports. Going to be a mock draft out soon for myself, podcasts, all that good stuff. You want to go take a look, I would definitely recommend it there. And then, like Jay said, I also do cover Notre Dame on the recruiting side mostly, but I mean, we're only a few weeks out now, of course, from September 3rd to go into the Horseshoe. So we're doing a lot more team stuff. Obviously, camp just is opened up now at Notre Dame. So if you want a little bit of insight into what Notre Dame is putting on the field potentially in September 3rd in that big matchup Week 1 against Ohio State, I would also recommend irishbreakdown.com and Thank you all for listening, as always.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jsteven07. We'll be back the rest of the week discussing, I think the next 2 days we have recruiting going on. Also, subscribe to Locked On Buckeyes on YouTube and also on your favorite podcast listening app, because there's some days there will be multiple episodes coming out, some shorter, some longer, so you just don't know what's coming into your feed. Subscribing is the best way to know and get an update when new shows come out. We're out of here on this Tuesday. Ryan, I enjoy having Ryan on. I enjoy having you listen to the show. We'll be back tomorrow and on Thursday with a little recruiting update with Jason Jordan of Sports Illustrated and also John Garcia Jr. on the football side as well.